Your child is burning up with fever. You press your palm to her forehead and feel the heat radiating through your skin. No thermometer. No pediatrician on speed dial. No pharmacy down the street. Just you, the firelight, and a decision that will determine whether she lives or dies. This was every parent's reality for 99% of human history. Yet infant mortality rates among modern hunter-gatherers like the Hadza of Tanzania hover around 15%, while in medieval Europe with its physicians and apothecaries, nearly half of all children died before age 5. How did your ancestors survive without doctors? And why were they sometimes healthier than civilizations that came after them? Your body is a walking pharmacy. Right now, your immune system is fighting off dozens of potential infections you will never know about. Your skin secretes antimicrobial peptides, tiny protein fragments that punch holes in bacterial cell walls. Your gut contains a kilogram of bacteria that manufacture vitamins and crowd out pathogens. Your liver detoxifies poisons. Your bone marrow churns out 2 million red blood cells every second. For 200,000 years, Homo sapiens survived because these systems worked, not because anyone understood them. The difference between your ancestors and you is not that they had stronger bodies. They had the same biology. What they had instead was a completely different relationship with their environment, their community, and the concept of health itself. Start with infection, the number one killer of humans throughout history. Your ancestors lived in small bands of 25 to 50 people. Population density matters desperately when it comes to disease. Anthropologist Richard Lee spent years with the Juhonsi people of the Kalahari in the 1960s, documenting their health and lifestyle. He found that epidemic diseases, the plagues that wiped out millions in agricultural societies, simply could not gain a foothold. Measles needs a population of at least 200,000 to sustain itself. Smallpox requires even more. Your nomadic ancestors moved camp every few weeks, leaving their waste and parasites behind. They had no livestock sleeping beside them, no rats thriving in grain stores, no contaminated water supplies serving thousands. When someone got sick, the small group size meant natural quarantine. You cannot have a plague without population density. But infection still happened. A cut from a stone tool, a puncture wound from a hunting accident, a respiratory infection after cold rain. What did your ancestors do? They turned to the 700,000 years of evolutionary trial and error encoded in the plants around them. Ethnobotany is the study of how cultures use plants, and it reveals something astonishing. Indigenous groups on every continent independently discovered the same medicinal compounds. The Hadza of Tanzania chew the inner bark of the Commiphora tree for stomach pain. That bark contains boswellic acids, the same anti-inflammatory compounds now sold as supplements in your pharmacy. Aboriginal Australians used tea tree oil for wounds. Laboratory testing confirms it kills staph bacteria, including antibiotic-resistant strains. The Shuar people of Ecuador applied resin from Croton lecleri trees to cuts. Researchers later isolated a compound called taspine from that resin that accelerates wound healing and stops bleeding. How did they know? You might think it was random trial and error, people tasting every plant until they found one that worked. But that would have killed them. Many plants are lethally poisonous. The answer is more elegant. Your ancestors watched animals. Primatologist Michael Huffman observed wild chimpanzees in Tanzania's Mahala Mountains swallowing bitter leaves from the Aspilia plant when they had intestinal parasites. The chimps did not chew the leaves. They swallowed them whole. Laboratory analysis showed the rough leaf hairs physically scrape parasites off the intestinal wall. Your ancestors inherited this ability to learn pharmacology from the natural world. They refined it over thousands of generations, creating oral medical traditions as sophisticated as any written pharmacopoeia. But what about surgery? Broken bones, difficult births, infected wounds that needed to be opened and drained. Here the evidence gets physical. Paleoanthropologists have found Neanderthal skeletons with healed fractures, some so severe the individual would have needed months of immobilized care to survive. A 40,000-year-old skeleton from Shanidar Cave in Iraq shows a man who lived into his 40s despite a withered arm, blindness in one eye, and a healed head injury. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone cared for him when he could not hunt or gather. This is medicine too. Not a pill or a procedure, but a social contract. Trepanation is the practice of drilling or scraping a hole through the skull. It is the oldest surgical procedure with archaeological evidence. Skulls with trepanation holes have been found across Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America, some dating back 9,000 years. Many show signs of healing, meaning the person survived. Why would anyone do this? The most likely explanation is treatment of head trauma. A skull fracture can cause bleeding between the skull and brain, building pressure that leads to unconsciousness and death. Releasing that pressure by creating an opening can be life-saving. Did your ancestors understand intracranial pressure? No. But they observed that people with head injuries sometimes recovered after the procedure, and that was enough. Pain management is another puzzle. Childbirth, broken bones, dental abscesses, all agonizing without modern anesthetics. Yet, humans managed. Archaeologist Karen Hardy analyzed 40,000-year-old Neanderthal teeth from El Cedron Cave in Spain and found traces of yarrow and chamomile. Both plants are bitter and have no nutritional value. Both are painkillers. The individual also had a dental abscess visible in the jawbone. They were self-medicating. Other cultures used more potent tools. The opium poppy appears in Neolithic farming sites across Europe 7,000 years ago. Coca leaves were chewed in the Andes at least 8,000 years ago. Cannabis was used in ancient Central Asia. Your ancestors had access to powerful analgesics and understood how to use them. The difference is they used them sparingly, embedded in ritual and community oversight, not as commodities. The twisted logic of medicine is that agriculture made humans sicker. This sounds backwards. Farming allowed population growth, permanent settlements, and eventually cities, writing, and all the apparatus of civilization. But physical anthropologists can read health in bones. Clark Spencer Larson compared skeletons of hunter-gatherers and early farmers in the same regions of North America and the Mediterranean. The results are stark. Farmers show more signs of anemia, infectious disease, and dental decay. Their stature decreased. Their bones became less dense. Why? The hunter-gatherer diet was wildly diverse. The Hadza today eat over 800 different plant species seasonally. Early farmers bet everything on a handful of crops, mostly grains. Nutritional diversity collapsed. Vitamin deficiencies became common. Dense living conditions allowed tuberculosis, leprosy, and dysentery to flourish. Richard Wrangham, a biological anthropologist at Harvard, argues that cooking is what made us human. Fire not only made food safer by killing pathogens, it made nutrients more bioavailable. Cooked starches deliver more calories with less digestive effort. But cooking created a new category of danger: burns. Your ancestors learned to treat them with a precision that would impress a modern burn unit. The Chumash people of coastal California applied fresh seaweed to burns. Seaweed contains alginates, compounds now used in advanced wound dressings, because they maintain moisture and reduce infection. The Maori of New Zealand used kawakawa leaves, which contain anti-inflammatory compounds similar to those in aspirin. What about mental health? Depression, anxiety, grief, trauma. Your ancestors faced all of it. Anthropologist Polly Wessner studied the Enga people of Papua New Guinea and documented how they processed collective trauma after tribal warfare. Rituals lasted for days. Singing, storytelling, public grieving, symbolic acts of cleansing. These were not superstitions. They were structured psychological interventions. Neuroscience now confirms that communal music synchronizes brain activity and releases oxytocin, strengthening social bonds. That public storytelling allows traumatic memories to be reprocessed in a safe context, reducing their emotional charge. Your ancestors did not have the language of neurons and neurotransmitters, but they had 10,000 years of observation showing that, isolated, silent suffering led to social breakdown, while structured communal processing led to resilience. The healer role existed in every culture studied by anthropologists. Not a doctor in the modern sense, but a specialist. Someone who knew plants, who performed rituals, who diagnosed and treated. Among the San people of southern Africa, the healer enters a trance state through rhythmic dancing and hyperventilation. In that state, they lay hands on the sick. Physiologically, something is happening. The healer's touch, the community's attention, the patient's expectation, all activate the same neural pathways that produce the placebo effect. A third of pain relief from morphine comes from expectation, not the drug. Your ancestors harnessed that biology without naming it. But let's be honest, many people died, especially children, especially in childbirth. A breech birth without skilled intervention usually meant death for mother, child, or both. Appendicitis was a death sentence. So was a ruptured intestine, meningitis, or sepsis from an infected wound. Life expectancy at birth for Paleolithic humans was probably around 35 years, though that number is misleading. Infant mortality dragged the average down. If you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of reaching 60 or older. Compare that to Roman Egypt, where life expectancy was 25, or medieval London at 30. Agricultural civilization increased disease burden faster than it increased medical knowledge. James Suzman, an anthropologist who has worked extensively with the Juhansi, argues that the concept of scarcity is a modern invention. Hunter-gatherers did not live in constant desperation. They worked fewer hours than modern humans, had more leisure time, and experienced less chronic stress. Stress is not a trivial factor in health. Your body under chronic stress shuts down non-essential functions. Digestion slows. Immune response weakens. Inflammation increases. Modern humans live in a state of perpetual low-level threat, your nervous system interpreting emails and traffic as mortal danger. Your ancestors faced acute threats: a lion, a rival group, a storm. but then return to baseline. The chronic diseases killing you today, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, are rare or absent in modern hunter-gatherer populations, not because they have better medicine, but because they have better conditions for the body's own regulatory systems to function. Here is the counterintuitive twist. Your ancestors did not survive without doctors. They survived without the need for doctors in the way you understand them. They lived in an environment where most of the diseases you fear did not exist yet. They had community structures that provided the psychological support your therapy attempts to replicate. They had knowledge systems that decoded the chemistry of their ecosystem without laboratories. When you go to a doctor today, you are often seeking treatment for conditions created by the mismatch between your Stone Age body and your modern environment. Obesity, anxiety, insomnia, type 2 diabetes. Your ancestors rarely faced these, not because they were healthier in some abstract sense, but because their daily existence was aligned with what your body was designed by evolution to handle. The invention of antibiotics in the 1940s changed everything. Bacterial infections that killed millions became treatable. Surgical survival rates soared. Life expectancy leapt. Modern medicine is a miracle, but it is a recent miracle. For most of your species' existence, survival depended on ecological knowledge, social cohesion, and the body's own resilience. The question is not whether you should abandon modern medicine. The question is, what have you lost by depending on it entirely? Your ancestors knew hundreds of plant species by name. You know dozens of prescription drug names. They could read health in posture, skin, and breath. You wait for lab results. They treated health as inseparable from relationships and environment. You treat it as an individual technical problem. Your child is burning up with fever. You press your palm to her forehead and reach for your phone to call the pediatrician. This is not weakness. This is the gift of living in an age where that phone exists. But somewhere in the back of your mind, encoded in your DNA, is 200,000 years of humans who pressed their palms to their children's foreheads and made a decision without that phone. And most of the time, that child survived.